Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.
I keep reading about engineered corn, but I don't know what that means.
Spring water, purified water, what's the difference?
Is imported beef safe for my family?
Consumers want to know the facts about the products they buy. That's where Real Ag comes in. From plant to plant and from pasture to plate, Cal Bauer and the Real Ag crew find the facts to help you sort the truth and help you understand Real Ag. Now here's your host, Kyle Bauer.
Threats to national security can appear anywhere, and agriculture is no exception. Agro security is our topic tonight on Real Ag. Agro terrorism and agro security are complex issues. Here are some of the basics.
Agro terrorism relates to, I think in the past, before 9/11, it would have been biological warfare. But now the term agro-terrorism is used to describe an intentional, malicious attack on the food supply or the agriculture sector by non-state actors. So in the past, we always looked at the people that did bad things were from a country. They were associated with a nation. And now with terrorism, where you have these non-state actors, these individuals, these groups, that's where the word terrorism comes from. And agro-terrorism is really just a part of that. So when they're focusing on the food supply or agriculture, which is all related, that's where the term agro-terrorism comes from. So an intentional contamination of food, technically even in a restaurant, or at the processing level would be agro-terrorism. Agro-security relates specifically to what we in the agriculture community are doing to protect food and agriculture.
Well, we do play such a big part in the world's food supply, whether it be grain, cattle, milk. There's a lot of food coming out of Kansas going to other parts of this nation and even world. So it's important, anything that happens here in Kansas could very quickly affect the world market. And it's a big piece of Kansas' economy, and we need to make sure that not only do we protect our food supply so we have food to eat, but we also need to protect the livelihoods of those farmers out there that are producing this food. Any type of incident that would take place that would put into question food product here coming out of Kansas, maybe going elsewhere, certainly is going to have an impact on what other people feel about our food. We've seen that before. People don't want tainted food, and very quickly our food could become worthless. And you see that in the market swings that we've seen over the years. And it's important that we keep our food supply safe, and to make sure that people trust that what's coming out of Kansas and all over the world is a safe product to eat.
From an ag emergency standpoint, what most likely will happen is there will be an incident that may happen at a premise at one of our livestock feeding operations, or perhaps a farm. And it would start normally on an animal side with a local veterinarian probably being called in because of a sick animal. And based on that evaluation from that veterinarian, then that would basically then trigger a sequence of events where individuals at the Department of Agriculture in the state of Kansas would be called in. They would come out and do some assessments, some on-site evaluations, and then that would begin the process in the event that there was a real agriculture emergency from an animal perspective that would then trigger the Kansas response plan if it were deemed to be positive.
The things that you've seen since 9/11 in the agriculture community are a result of a lot of things that go on in industry regarding biosecurity. So those industries are becoming aware that they could be a target of a bad guy. So I want to come onto your premises and spread disease That used to be a lot easier to do in a large feedlot. But what you see now is a lot more biosecurity measures put in place. So you go onto a feedlot, there will be signs having people go into the office to check in, and they keep track of who's been on and off that facility. You'll see that in dairies. I think the swine industry has always been like that. They're much more closed operations. But a lot of these places that used to be very open, that anyone could just drive up and take your kids and walk through the area, that's not the way it is anymore, because they are becoming aware that should someone want to do something, they could do it and leave and you'd never know who was there. And so you're seeing a lot more biosecurity measures put in place, and that is a form of biosecurity. Obviously the cleaning piece is part of it, access is another piece of biosecurity. If something were to happen, our veterinarians would want to know who's been there and who's left, and not just people, but the animals. And you used to see a lot of animal movement without keeping track of where they came from and where they went specifically. And now you'll see, you can usually trace in and out of a facility like that because they're keeping better records, and that's all part of biosecurity. So our vets can go and know what came in and what left and where it went. It has been said, and I think the famous quote is by Secretary Tommy Thompson after 2001, where he publicly stated that he was surprised there hadn't been an attack on the nation's food supply. And I think his comments were, I think his rationale for the comments was that we needed to do something as a nation to start protecting the food supply. That although we have regulatory measures in place that do a pretty good job on a daily basis of unintentional contamination and finding these things, sometimes it does take a long time to figure out where or what product was indicated in some sort of contamination. So I think his comments were meant to get the nation, and specifically maybe the federal government and Homeland Security, to start looking at what could happen, how do we protect a very open system.
The nature of the threat in Kansas would be from a deliberate attack on our food supply that's out there. And that's probably the biggest fear that we see as a foreign animal disease, or as I say, a deliberate attack on our nation's food supply. And if you look at where Kansas ranks in the importance of agriculture, not only to the state economy, but to our nation, and the importance of Kansas production in agriculture to our nation's food supply, that's really what makes it of critical importance to the state of Kansas. There's a variety of ways that can happen, and that could be a deliberate introduction of a pathogen into animal feed. It could be an infected animal. It could take the approach of something as innocuous as somebody that has traveled to a foreign country where some of these pathogens and infectious diseases are already endemic in that area, and then bringing that back and infecting a premise. So there's a whole host of ways that that could be introduced into the state of Kansas, or any other state for that matter.
Now, once you get down to the local level, you could have somebody that's a disgruntled employee that would do just some one-off kind of thing. Somebody that wants to make a statement of some kind, somebody that wants to impact a small population. So we do have these, and you have to watch those as well. And we have people that will do agro terrorism in order to make money. They will put things in that should not be there in order to make money.
Animal disease is a big concern. Kansas agencies use the prevention of foot and mouth disease as their basis for dealing with potential pathogens.
I mean, the thing we plan for the most in the agro-security community is foreign animal diseases in livestock. And so states with a high poultry population plan for avian influenza. States like Kansas and a lot of Midwestern states plan for foot and mouth disease. We feel like if we can contain an outbreak of foot and mouth, we could probably do anything, because that's the hardest one. Foot and mouth disease is transmissible from animal to animal, and it can be transmitted through fomites, which would be on surfaces and airborne. People can be a host to not really a host to the disease, but transmit the disease to the animals if they've been around infected animals. But there is no human health consequences of foot and mouth disease or food safety consequences. And I think that's one of our big messaging challenges that we'll have in an outbreak. And there's so much planning going on around that subject. And it's not just within government, it's also within the industry. So the industry associations have already worked diligently on those messages that would go out to the public. And so has governmental agencies and producer organizations. The idea is that the information would be coming from multiple trusted sources to the consumer. We were working on it before the outbreak happened in the United Kingdom. And then after that, things really picked up. And when I say we, it's a lot of people. It's the industry associations, it's the Department of Transportation, the Highway Patrol, Emergency Management, their Wildlife and Parks and Tourism. All these agencies at the state level work with local emergency managers, extension agents, producer organizations to really plan what we would do in an outbreak, educational materials. We teach people good biosecurity measures, knowing who's been in and out of your premises, lots of different things that we're doing and we've always been doing. We just are choosing different little pieces each year to add on to that process.
Government agencies take an all-hazards approach to dealing with potential threats to our security.
Regardless of how the pathogen got there, many of the strategies we've been working on for years before agro terrorism was an issue are applicable. How do you detect it and how do you get rid of it? Okay? So it is the things that we've been doing just from a strictly food safety standpoint of things that might have happened incidentally are applicable. The science is applicable to if it happens intentionally. And so we have been able to spring from our traditional food safety work over the years directly into this agro-terrorism area.
It shouldn't matter if it's a tornado or an ag security incident. Yes, there are differences in those incidents, but a lot of the things are still the same. And so if we're prepared for the tornado, a lot of times what we find is that we're also prepared because a lot of the equipment will help us with dealing with an ag security incidents.
When we look at those events, we try to accommodate the basics that have to be accomplished in any kind of a disaster because that's the most affordable and that's the easiest when you look at the limited resources that states have. And Kansas is no different, that we take an all-hazards approach to our planning and response and recovery to all events.
There's no question. The best way to deal with an incident is to prevent it.
A real good place to focus is how do we prevent it? We don't ever want it to happen. And we're not naive enough that you can do all that, but if the more prevention you can have, the less you have to depend on the rest of the system functioning the way that it should. And by the way, we have good strategies for detecting hazards and eliminating hazards, but let's try to prevent it if we can. We have been in meetings where we've talked about the strategies of how to respond, okay, in order that we prevent as much as we can, because even though it may not be a public health risk, and that's what we're most concerned about, it can be an economic factor, because if something happens to the meat supply, you don't sell meat for a long period of time. It's anywhere along the line. Now, what you really do is that you look at the places that are of greatest impact. For example, where can something happen that it impacts a large amount of product that then gets distributed rather than one sandwich or something, okay? So that's where you focus your energies and you say, well, does that solve every problem? No, it doesn't. What you're doing is you're putting a lot of emphasis on prevention, those things that give you the biggest bang for your buck, and you watch most closely those areas where you can have common commingling of product, and if something were to happen there, then it gets distributed widely.
What you've seen since 9/11 is a lot of measures put in place at the federal level on the regulatory side that translates down to the states, because the states generally contract with USDA and the Food and Drug Administration to do a lot of inspections. And those inspections have a big role to play in what we do to protect this food supply. So those daily activities that go on in slaughter plants, at sale barns. All the things that we do on a regulatory basis are a part of protecting the industry and the food supply.
Well, one of the things that Kansas has been very active in doing is preparing for the time where maybe we would need to limit the movement of livestock on our roadways. If we were to see an incident happen in another part of this country, we would quickly need to make sure that we're not seeing infected animals coming into Kansas and then infecting our animals. And vice versa, if we were to ever see something happen here in Kansas, we wouldn't want those animals to leave our state and infecting other populations. So the Department of Ag and Sandy Johnson's leadership has been very instrumental in working with other state entities across the United States and getting them to understand that it's very important to start planning and then even training and exercising on those plans. Local law enforcement will have to be a big piece of what we would do in screening vehicles. And then working with our bordering states. All of the bordering states have been contacted, and right now we're working with them to figure out how can we share those roadways, because obviously a roadway that's leaving Kansas is going into another state. Hopefully we can share some of those responsibilities in screening those vehicles with those folks. One of the things that we've seen is that there's been a big interest in the program that Kansas has put together. And Kansas has been asked to actually travel to other parts of the nation to tell them about the best practices that are taking place in Kansas in that plan. And we're very proud to be a part of this consortium here in Kansas underneath the leadership of the Department of Ag in teaching others, what we have done. And we're seeing that it's becoming very popular across the United States.
We do exercises frequently to ensure that we have a cadre of trained and ready professionals that can come in and assist in various roles in that to mitigate that.
An exercise is simply just taking a mock incident, something that you would plan for, and actually simulating that it's actually taking place. Now that it's taking place, what do we do as responders to address that? So the plans will tell us what we're supposed to do. Now we're going to go out and we're going to physically do that. Generally they can be tabletop exercises or actual physical exercises. Tabletop meaning that we're all in one room and we're talking about the things that we're going to do and making sure that we're collaborating together, again, with all of the partners, because again, it's not just law enforcement that's going to be dealing with this, or fire, or EMS. In an ag security incident, obviously, we're going to be turning to the Department of Agriculture for leadership. But exercising really is just physically doing it, talking about it, going through it, making sure that, again, you're prepared for what the plan says that you're supposed to do.
Agro-security is everyone's business, and when the threat of a potential incident appears, the military, federal agencies, local government, and even civilian companies spring into action.
As the Adjutant General, I'm responsible in the state of Kansas for leading the Kansas Army and Air National Guard, as well as the Division of Emergency Management in the state, as well as Homeland Security Advisor to the Governor for the state of Kansas. We have an Intelligence Fusion Center that we bring in, as I said, state, local, and federal partners, subject matter experts from the industries in, and we look at, again, all of our threats that we have or potentially could have in the state of Kansas, and we continually look and assess the threat picture. We look at, again, at the classified information that's out there. We look at unclassified and open source information and try to piece, if you will, the potential risk that there may be to the state of Kansas. And so once that is put together, then we push that information out to our key stakeholders in private industry, as well as our public safety partners, to keep everyone aware of the situation that may be out there.
Well, the Kansas Highway Patrol is just one piece of the overall law enforcement effort in Kansas to help protect our food supply, not only here in our state, but all over the United States. routinely, troopers out on the road will work traffic accidents, for example, that involve a truck overturned with food in it. And one of the things that we do immediately is get in contact with our partner at the state level, which is the Kansas Department of Agriculture, to get somebody out to inspect the load and to figure out what we're going to do with that food. Because as you can imagine, many times in those accident situations, the food is contaminated or damaged to the point where it needs to be destroyed.
We work with private associations, Kansas Livestock Association, the Cattlemen's Association, pork producers, grain and feed. Lots of different private industry associations are invited to our planning meetings, and they are stakeholders when we do plans and exercises.
The intelligence gathering process, again, is part of our all hazards approach, and certainly we have a Kansas Intelligence Fusion Center that works with state, local, and federal partners and subject matter experts to look at open source information as well as classified information, and then take that information and look across the state of Kansas at our critical infrastructure, our assets and resources, and determine the threat that's out there, and then from that threat that we can then look at mitigation strategies to minimize the effect.
The National Guard's always going to be a big part of what we do in Kansas in a large-scale incident. As soon as we exhaust all of the resources from the local level, the state level, the federal level is going to obviously be brought in at some point. But National Guard has been a great resource for us here in Kansas and really all over the United States in providing us help. For example, they can help us with roadblocks. We can put a trooper with a National Guard representative in one location, and that way we're not putting two law enforcement officers at one post. We can use National Guard folks for things like that, but they're a great asset to us as first responders.
Local veterinarians, that would be our federal partners at USDA, FEMA, other response entities, and then our state partners that we have with Department of Health and Environment, Department of Agriculture, Transportation. My role as the Adjutant General in the state of Kansas is that we have the statutory authority for the overall planning for all hazards in the state of Kansas, and so we set that in motion through the Kansas response plan, and we also have the responsibility here in the agency for in the event of a disaster. Once the governor declares an emergency, then that allows this agency to then synchronize all of those resources that may become necessary to provide support to the local first responders, that local incident commander that's on the ground. So that gives us the ability at the state level then to synchronize those resources and ensure that we're looking out to ensure that they have the resources that they need when they need them, and then also to provide the conduit for bringing in federal resources should those become necessary. As part of our responsibilities here for the Adjutant General's office in any emergency would be that we would also provide for the Joint Information Center, and their primary responsibility is to coordinate with all of the public affairs and information officers of state agencies, but also the key industry stakeholders in terms of getting accurate information out, not only to the public, but to industry and other partners that are out there to ensure that we keep people informed of the latest information. And that's also a great place for people to stay close contact to find out what they can do in these situations, is really pay attention to the information that's going to be coming out from media sources, because part of this agency's responsibility is to manage that Joint Information Center, and that's to make sure that we're getting the latest and best information out as we can.
Our security is our responsibility as well. Here's what you and I can do to keep ourselves safe.
On an agricultural type emergency, the main thing is to report suspicious activity that you may see that's out there regarding maybe individuals who look out of place that may be at a farm location or at a livestock feeding operation. Would be the main thing, is to report that suspicious activity to local authorities. Beyond that is to do a little research on agricultural type threats, and make sure that you have a plan for yourself and your family to ensure that if something like that does happen, that you have the basics covered for you and your family.
I think one of the things that we need to make sure is that if we were to ever have something like this happen, God forbid, we need to make sure that everybody remembers, just like in a construction zone, there are going to be delays, and we need to be patient. We need to understand why the officials are doing what they're doing. Again, it all goes back to the safety of our food supply.
You are your own sentinel. You pay attention to what's going on around you, and you assess the circumstance that you're in, where the product is coming from, and then the thing is follow some of the things at home that if something were to happen to that product, something were to be put into it like a pathogenic organism, if you wash it, don't cross-contaminate, make sure you cook it thoroughly at home, and take those personal responsibilities. The processors out there, the industry tries to get the safest product they can to you, but still follow up with proper handling, refrigeration, and cooking procedures.
Probably the main thing to tell people is not to panic, but stay informed.
That wraps it up for this episode of Real Ag. We hope the information presented here gives you a glimpse of all the people working to keep you safe. On behalf of the Real Ag crew, I'm Kyle Bauer, helping you sort the truth and helping you understand Real Ag.
Production of Real Ag is made possible in part by an underwriting grant from the Kansas Soybean Commission, the Soybean Checkoff, progress powered by farmers.